So, the historic summit between the US and Russia in Saudi Arabia just ended after like 4.5 hours. This is a seminal event in geopolitics. We'll quickly summarize what this all means and what we can expect, and also some possible cynical aspects of what these peace talks mean. So, first of all, this is a stunning reversal of the US foreign policy towards Russia in the last 3 years and in the last decade, because really, since 2014, the US has refused to talk to Putin and to Russia. And they've been preparing for this war for a long time. The entire thing was an American proxy war against Russia, and they really wanted to bring down Russia. Remember how they even talked about chopping up Russia, balkanizing it, trying to overthrow Putin, making ruble into rubble. And Russia became the most sanctioned country in the history of the world and all that stuff. So, this is a serious admission of the US that the proxy war against Russia failed and there is a new multipolar world. In fact, if you look at the big picture of the Anglo-Saxons against Russia, the hostility runs back for more than 200 years. You have to go back to Napoleon in 1812 when he was funded by the globalist banksters to wage a war against Russia. So this is huge. I think finally the powers that be have realized that they have to live with Russia. So this is a momentous occasion. That's number one. And then number two is that it was really amazing that the talks did not involve Ukraine. So the negotiations to end the Ukraine war had nobody from Ukraine and also nobody from Europe. So this is really humiliating for Europe, which blindly followed the US and became very Russophobic. But the war and the future of Europe is being decided by the US and Russia. So that's really shocking. And there were only five people, two from Russia, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, and the former Russian ambassador to the US, and then three people from the US, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Mike Waltz from the NSA, and Witkoff, the Middle East representative for Trump. And so basically, the two big topics were about ceasefire, ending the war, and then also new elections in Ukraine. And again, this was decided without Ukraine participation. But they want to have new elections, which basically means that Zelensky will be gone by the end of the year. And also, there is some cynicism. As I said before, this entire operation was a proxy war by America, but the US never apologized. The war has been going on since at least 2014. But in fact, you can go back to 2008 when NATO expansion said Ukraine will become a part of NATO. So that's when the hostilities started. Or you can even go back to 2004 when George Soros and the US deep state orchestrated a color revolution in Ukraine and they got rid of the president who fairly won the election because he happened to be pro-Russia. So the long interference by the U.S. has been conveniently ignored, and the U.S. just now blames Ukraine and Europe. So there is politics for you. And this meeting was followed by a 3 hour chat between Trump and Putin. So that's amazing. When was the last time that Trump spoke with a foreign leader for 3 hours? Trump has a very short attention span. He is Mr. Sound bites and slogans. And Putin is very intellectual. He's very thoughtful. He's very profound. So how they spoke for 3 hours is quite astonishing. And Trump's defense minister made some stunning announcements, just blew the minds away of all those people listening. So, number one, uh, there's no going back to the pre-2014 borders for Ukraine. That is, Ukraine will not get Crimea back, and it will not even get the four regions that Russia has annexed over the last 3 years. So that would be Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. Those four regions make up like 20% of Ukraine's land. So that'll be gone. So that's pretty stunning. And no NATO membership for Ukraine. Pete Hegseth made that clear. And that's quite a blow to Ukraine, considering that NATO membership was always held in front of Ukraine as the carrot, right? Hey guys, just defeat Russia, just kill, 1 million more Russians and sacrifice 5 million more people of your own, 5 million Ukrainian lives. So just die a little bit more, fight a little bit more, and you will get NATO membership. So that's gone now. That's pretty shocking. And worse, once the ceasefire is reached, uh, there should be some troops along the borders, like peacekeeping troops, but it's not going to be NATO. So NATO troops will not maintain peace, and no US troops either. So US will not be in charge of responsible for peace along the new borders. So who has to do that? It has to be European soldiers and some Ukrainian soldiers, obviously. But Europe has to send in their troops. And if something happens and Russians kill some Europeans, the US will not intervene. The US will not go to war with Russia because of the dead Europeans, because those Europeans will not be representing NATO. So, maybe the British and the French have to sacrifice their own lives to protect Ukraine. Will they do that? I don't think it's going to be politically viable. And even more shockingly, the US is planning on withdrawing the troops from, say, Baltic states to start with. So that would be like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and who knows, maybe even from some other countries in the region. So the US wants to make Russia feel at ease. So there's no threat with the US troops on Russian border. Because to be fair, that would be like Russian troops in Mexico and Canada. The US would not like that. So that's a fair thing that Trump wants to do. And then Trump has sent some really shocking proposals to Ukraine. He not only wants, $500 billion worth of critical minerals and rare earth minerals, but he also wants the agricultural land, ports, infrastructure in Ukraine, and the US wants the first refusal right for all the products that Ukraine is going to export. So this could be lithium, wheat, coal, natural gas, whatever. I mean, all that has to, 50% of the revenue has to go to the US. So, so Ukraine's future is very, very bleak. Okay, so their population is down 50% already from 1990 to 1993 when they got independence. So they've lost half the population. Some of them are in the Donbass and other pro-Russian regions, and many millions have fled Ukraine into Europe and other countries when the war started, and maybe 1 to 2 million Ukrainians have died in the war, and another perhaps 5 million are wounded. These are like soldiers without legs and arms. So this is a disaster for Ukraine. There is no future for Ukraine. And it has lost its sovereignty. All that for war. What? It's the stupidest decision that the Ukrainian elites have made. It's very, very sad. And here's the thing. A lot of people in Ukraine and Europe are still talking in delusional terms like peace, security through strength, peace through strength. Okay? There's no strength. If Ukraine wants peace, the first thing it has to do is to denazify itself. Okay, there's Nazism all over Ukraine now. They have to completely denazify. It's going to take many years to de-brainwash the young Ukrainian men and children. And then they have to start treating all the ethnic Russians equally, like a proper democracy with human rights. Because right now, the Russian speaking people, who are like maybe 30% of the remaining Ukraine, if you don't take into account the four regions, so those people, they cannot speak their Russian language. There is no Russian TV, Russian radio, Russian website, Russian newspaper. They cannot learn the Russian language in schools and colleges. They are persecuted. It's really horrible. So that needs to end. And then Ukraine needs to make peace with Russia, like go back to what it used to be. They used to be like brothers for centuries, and the Russian the tribe or the emperors, they actually started in Kiev like 1,000 years ago. So they're like brothers, and they should go back to that. And Ukraine should accept neutrality. So no NATO membership. Maybe they can join the European Union, but I don't think the EU would want Ukraine when it is so poor, because then basically the entire European population is going to move to Europe. If they become a part of the EU, then there's no visa requirement. There's going to be a free travel, and all the Ukrainians are going to run to Germany, Sweden, and all the other relatively richer countries in Europe, and there will be nobody in Ukraine. So I don't think the EU membership is a possible answer as well. So this is really horrible for Ukraine. So that's the end. And then the final thought is about some cynicism. So some people are rightfully pointing out that once the US makes peace with Russia, it's going to start a war with Iran and or China. So, first of all, I don't think a war with China would be possible because if the US cannot even beat Russia, how are they going to beat China? China has even far better defense uh, materials. You know, they have the world's largest navy. They have all kinds of anti-missiles, anti-fighter jets, and now they have new systems that can detect the F-35 like from 2,000 kilometers away. And of course, the interdependency, right? So all the Western corporations, they were able to swiftly move away from Russia. But they cannot do that with China, right? Because if you look at, say, Tesla, Apple, Walmart, all the big corporations in the US are still very dependent on China. So without China, the US corporations, the US Wall Street, the US economy would just collapse. So I don't think they can really do anything about China. But it's possible that they are preparing a war against Iran because that is something that Israel wants to do. So, one possible scenario, a negative aspect of this historic treaty with Russia might be that, hey, we might do something in the Middle East, but we don't want you to interfere. So we have to see how that pans out. Okay, hope that helps. That's all. Have a wonderful day.